You're listening to How to Drink Less, and I'm your host, Adriana Cloud. Whether your goal is to cut back, take a break, or say goodbye to alcohol for good, this podcast will help you stop drinking on autopilot, learn how to manage cravings, and feel fully in control around alcohol. It's easier than you think. Listen on to find out how. Hi friends, welcome back for another episode. I have a very special treat for you today. For the very first time on How to Drink Less, I have a guest. I've invited my friend Amber Abila, who is a binge eating coach, to have a conversation with me because I know that for so many people who are over drinking, they also tend to be overeating. Those two things go hand in hand. And if you're anything like I was back when I was drinking, if you're trying to stay away from alcohol, you may be finding yourself using food as a replacement. So I thought I should invite the expert to talk to us about this and give us some tips on how to stop eating when we're not hungry and how to trust ourselves around food. Amber is also the host of the podcast Become a Confident Eater, which I absolutely love because she gives really great practical tips on there for lots of different situations, from how to stop emotional eating, how to say no to people who are pushing food on us, how to stop eating in secret, and lots of other great topics. So without further ado, welcome Amber to the podcast.
Thank you, Adriana. I'm so excited and honored to be your first guest. It truly means a lot to me. Me and Adriana have been friends in person too for a couple years as well as online. And so I'm really excited to talk to you guys about all things food today. And you're right that there is so much crossover. So I think this episode is going to be so valuable for anyone who's overeating, binge eating, just struggling with food in general.
Thank you so much for being here. And I would love to just start with your story. Tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are today and anything that you feel is important for my listeners to know about you.
Yeah, so my journey started back when I decided I wanted to lose some weight, and I did what most people do when they want to lose weight. Google it, and they figure out that calories in versus calories out is the answer. And so I downloaded my Fitness Pal, I put in my weight goal, and I got popped out a number, and I decided, okay, this is how I'm going to be eating, and I did it. I followed it, I lost some weight, and I think this is how it starts for most people is you go on your first diet, it seems so innocent, it probably works your first time, and that's what kind of hooks you. You start to feel like you've got it figured out, like you have more control over food in your body. But after a period of restricting calories, I kept going lower and lower until I was at the point where I was eating 1,000 calories a day. And I started getting really hungry then and started thinking about food a lot more, as one does when they're not eating enough food. Over time, I was white knuckling more and more every day, trying to get through the day without going over my calorie limit, until one day I had my first binge. I remember it so clearly. It was around Christmas time. I snuck downstairs and I promised myself I was just going to have one cookie. But then as I had that one cookie, I felt overflooded with desire for more. And then I had another and another and another until I'd had like 7 cookies. And I remember feeling like I was just a ghost in my body at that time. I didn't even remember what happened. I was like, how did that happen? I felt like it just came over me. And I felt so guilty after that was also the first time I ever purged. So I did struggle with bulimia for a time period as well, because I was just so desperate to keep the weight off. I wanted to do anything to try to maintain that control. The cycle went on and on for a couple of months until it was happening multiple times a week where I was binge eating and purging. My weight was going up. I was thinking about food all day, and I just realized that I couldn't keep going on like this anymore. And so that's when I sought out therapy. So therapy is oftentimes the first place we go if we are wanting to take more of this mental health approach to our habits. I'm sure same thing with drinking, where we think, okay, I'm going to get this together. I'm going to go to therapy. This will hopefully help me. But unfortunately, therapy didn't really help me. It helped me with the bulimia side of things, where it did help me stop purging, but I think that was more just also because I realized how harmful it was for my health. But I still felt like even in therapy, they kept just going to my past and asking me how I was feeling, and all that stuff was great, but I was wanting to know, well, how do I actually eat normally? How do I stop the binge in the moment though? Yeah. And I never learned any tools around that. And so I went through multiple therapists for a couple of years, and it just wasn't really working. It wasn't until I came across this blog post online when I was Googling how to stop binge eating. I literally got past page 50, I remember, on Google. I'd gone through everything, every single tip.
Wow.
When someone started talking about how they stopped binge eating and they viewed it as just a habit, just something that they got into the bad habit of doing, where one day you were restricting, you got hungry, you started binge eating, morning. And then over time, the more that you did it, the more it got ingrained in your brain. And I learned something in that post and throughout following this woman. Her name was Catherine Hansen. She still does amazing work today. She wrote a book, Brain Over Binge, about how just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And just because your brain tells you you need to binge and you need to eat a lot of food doesn't mean you actually need to do that. My mind was blown. I was like, what? Like, I don't need to eat a lot of food. And we know this logically. But I also learned about how our brain wires in habits and how every time we do something, it wires it in more and it starts to repeat that habit. And then every time we don't do that habit, it will unwire that pathway and make it so we don't want to do it anymore. And those urges start to go away. So I made it my mission. I said, all right, I'm going to rewire my brain. I'm going to learn how to eat normally. And over time, I did get to the place. It took a long time. That big insight around the habits was the first of my insights, and I'd say one of the biggest. But it wasn't until a couple of years later that I felt like I was truly free around food. I also had to do a lot of work on my relationship with food. And I think that's where people also get stuck if they're doing maybe more of this mindset work and this work around urges. It's like we still have to learn food skills, and there are still some actionable things on what we should be eating, what we should not be eating, how to think about food that are also important to get to this point that I really wanted to get to and I am now as a normal eater who just doesn't struggle with food.
Thank you so much for everything you just shared. Thank you for sharing your story. I know that so many people can relate to that, and there were several things in there that I could relate to for my relationship with food, but also so much of that applies to how we end up drinking as well, including the part about how drinking also becomes a habit. If you keep doing the same thing again and again, that's what you're teaching your brain to do and to expect. And so it almost becomes this autopilot behavior that you just do almost without even thinking or without consciously deciding. So there's so much to relate to here and so many different directions I want to go to. But I guess I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to why do we overeat in the first place? Like what happens in our brains that leads us down that path to begin with?
So it's normally starting for most people from this place of dieting or restriction. So someone was on a low calorie diet, they go on keto, they, cut out some big food group that they don't really need to be cutting out. And when we do that, what happens biologically in our brain is it starts to perceive that food is disappearing from the face of the planet Earth. Our lower brain, this part of us that's keeping us alive, it does not know that we're trying to be healthy and do a juice cleanse. All it knows is we're not getting enough calories now, and we better eat as much of it as we can while we still have access to it in case it goes away. And so because of that, when we're in this starvation mode, essentially, our brain is hyper focused on food because it's trying to get more of it. Think about if you were in a desert and you didn't have water or very limited access to water, what is your brain going to do? It's going to hyper focus on where can I get water? How can I get the source of water? Once I get water, how can I get as much of it as possible while I have it? That's what starts to happen around food. So after a period of that, then it can start to become more habituated, where our brain starts to get used to being that way and living that way. And that's where it starts to become a habit where we start to feel like we need to do this in order to survive. We know that logically we don't need to eat that much food, but to our brain, it's like, well, there was this period of restriction, so maybe we need to keep eating this food in order to be safe. And that's what I think a lot of people misunderstand, is that it's not just something that you just like lost control one day and you didn't have like willpower to fight your way through it. You're fighting your biology here because your biology is always trying to keep you alive. And so it's doing what it perceives will keep you alive. But that perceived word is very important because it might have kept us alive at one point in time where we really did need to eat more food in order to not starve ourselves, but it's not really what's helping us stay where we want to be now. Then the other big factor for people is what we're eating. So a big thing that's changed in our food systems in the last 50 years is the introduction of more ultra processed foods. Humans have been processing foods to some degree for a very long time. We've been canning food, we've been drying food, we've been preserving foods with various methods like salting for very long times. And so that's not really the problem. I think people get confused sometimes by this word process, which is like why I like the word ultra process a little bit more. If it didn't exist 100 years ago, it's probably a processed food like Cheez-Its and flavor blasted goldfish and Oreos, like those we know are processed foods. And what's happened with those is the introduction of a lot of flavorings and flavoring type molecules. And these confuse our body on what is coming in. So to understand this, we need to understand how our body learns to crave certain things. And how it does this is we can't taste all of the nutrition in our taste buds. We can only taste the basics, sweet, savory, umami, all of that, but we can't taste what is actually in it. So what our brain has to do, it has to make a prediction. It predicts if we eat an orange, we're going to get vitamin C that comes into our gut. But think about now when we have things like orange gummy bears that don't actually have any orange in it, we eat that orange gummy bear and our brain says, wow, this must be the best orange in all of planet Earth. We have hit the jackpot. We should eat a lot of these oranges because they're probably very nutritious. But there's no actual orange nutrition in there. There's no vitamin C, there's nothing of fiber or the good sorts of stuff that are in oranges. And so that creates confusion in our body and starts to drive up our cravings. So this kind of goes into another reason that people can struggle with food. If you're someone who you're like, I haven't really dieted before, I never really restricted, but you've been exposed to a lot of processed foods throughout your life, that can also create this increase in cravings. And usually the difference between someone who ends up binge eating versus just overeating is the degree of hunger they experience. So if someone has dieted for a long time and they've experienced a lot of hunger, or, maybe you were in a true situation where you had food insecurity when you were growing up, you have had a time where you've been really hungry because you didn't have access to food, those are usually the type of people who end up more in the binge eating category, which is eating a lot larger amount of food in an even faster way in a shorter time span. Whereas overeating is more like, oh, I had an extra cookie or two that really didn't feel good. And so the people who are overeating, maybe they didn't diet as hard, they didn't restrict as hard, but they've still been exposed throughout their life to these ultra processed foods that can confuse our body and drive up our cravings.
That is also interesting. Wow, that's really fascinating to think about. What we put in our bodies also affects how we process that and what we learn about food and what food would taste like or what nutrients we would extract from it. That's super interesting. But one thing you said earlier that I want to come back to is this idea of willpower, because this comes up a lot with the work I do with people who are trying to drink less or quit drinking, is that we get this idea that if we overindulge, for lack of a better word, if we drink more than we plan to, or we eat more than we plan to, or more than we wanted to, that somehow we have failed because of lack of willpower. That it's a matter of, I just need to be more self-disciplined. I need to try harder. I'm not strong enough. This must be why I keep going beyond what I said I was going to do. Of course, what happens after that is that we start shaming ourselves because we think something is wrong with us if we keep doing the same behavior. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit what you see in your work around how shame actually ends up backfiring when it comes to trying to change a habit.
I call it the shame bubble, that when we're in it, we just feel like so stuck, so lost in it, and we can't get out. It's normal to feel shame around this because if you think about like the messages that we get from society, especially as women, we're kind of taught that like the worst thing we could ever do or be is gain weight and get fat. And so when we're taught these messages, of course we're going to feel embarrassed on eating a lot of food. Of course we're going to want to hide it. Of course we're going to feel ashamed about it. But first of all, so many more people struggle with it than you even imagine. I'll never forget that when I started my business and I was so scared, I was telling everyone, I'm going to start this business and helping people stop overeating and binge eating. And I was like so scared what everyone would think of me. But I had pretty much all of my friends come out and tell me, oh my gosh, Amber, me too. I've struggled with this. And even if it wasn't full-blown binge eating, it was I've struggled with my body image. I've struggled feeling guilty around food. I've struggled with my weight. There's just so much within that that's all wrapped up. And so if you're hiding it from people, like just remember that so many people struggle with this. And the other thing I like to remind people too is that at the end of the day, all you're doing is eating food. Like no one here is like kicking puppies or like abusing children. Like we are just eating food. There is nothing inherently shameful about that. Yes, it might be more food than your body needs, but it's just food. And kind of like looking into that as just the fact of it can help start to uplift some of the shame and start to see that like I'm just a messy human like everyone else, and everyone has their shit. Like everyone, has some sort of bad habit, whether over drinking, overeating, over scrolling, overspending. People can all relate to that in one way because that's life with a ancient brain in the modern day. That's what we have to deal with.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. And yes, I agree absolutely that when you realize you're not alone and so many other people are struggling, maybe not exactly the same thing, but they're struggling with something. And we all have these habits that we're not super proud of. And welcome to being human. That's just part of the human experience. We're none of us perfect. We all have these things that we wish we did less of. So yes, it's really helpful to remember that we're not alone. And I love the reminder that in the end, it's just food, really. And I love the idea of the shame bubble. That's kind of an interesting way to think about it. Yes, I'm visualizing it and reminding myself that all I need to do is step out and things are better on the outside of this shame bubble. So thank you for that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is, I know I'm not alone in this, but when I was first trying to quit drinking, I found myself eating more, and especially eating a lot of sugary treats. And part of it was, I just felt like, well, if I'm not drinking, I deserve a treat. So there was definitely this idea of, I need a treat because look at me, I'm doing this really hard thing. And it also just felt like I needed something, right? Like my body was just so confused about what was happening. I was trying to retrain my brain not to want alcohol. And I hear this from my clients all the time, is that when they're trying to stop drinking, they end up eating more, and in general, more sweets in particular too. And so I wonder if you have any advice for people who are currently dealing with that, sort of replacing one habit with another, because then it becomes like, oh no, look at me now, I'm doing something else terrible for me that I will then have to address that. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Absolutely. And this is something I see a lot with my clients too, is I have a lot of clients who have mentioned to me, I did this really hard thing where I quit drinking or I quit smoking, but now I can't figure out food. And it just seems like I just moved it to the other thing. So I hear this all the time too. And I think it's really common. It's just another way that these foods and these substances are deceiving us in a way and promising pleasure, but giving us a very opposite experience. And the first thing I'll say is, one, you're in a really good position if you have been working on your drinking, you have been learning about how to stop drinking, you're already listening to this podcast, like you are ahead of so many other people because you are learning very valuable skills that will also help you with food. And so I think people think that sometimes when they are, okay, I'm going to solve my alcohol stuff and then I'll solve the food stuff. A lot of times they're very similar. And I want you to look at what skills and tools and thoughts that I use around alcohol that I can also apply to food now. So one of the big insights that I think people have around alcohol and food is, oh, this isn't giving me what I want, right? This isn't giving me the pleasure that I want. It's not giving me the relaxation that I want, the fun I want, that it's actually really taking all of that away. And I want you to look at the same thing around food. Again, there's so much similarities. I was gonna say it was just for food, but food, we've been brainwashed by a lot of marketing around that it helps with our emotions, that it makes us feel better. You think about all the advertisements that we've ever seen around ice cream and all the movies that have shown us when we're sad, we eat ice cream.
Yeah.
The slogan for Kit Kats is something like, take a break with a Kit Kat. I remember seeing something with M&Ms about M&Ms will make you happy, or Snickers, you're not you when you're hungry. So make sure you never get hungry and eat Snickers instead. And it will make you feel like you don't have to get hangry and turn into this monster. There's hundreds of these examples where we're taught, not by internally, but externally, that food will make us feel better. And I always find it interesting because our actual biological response to stress is to turn off our hunger. If you look at any other animal, when they are really stressed or in this like very emotional, distressing place, what happens is their digestive system shuts down. And the reason biologically this happens is because we only have a certain amount of blood in our veins that can be used for various activities. So we can't use it for our muscles and our digestion at once. This is why we don't eat a big meal before you go for a run, because then your blood gets diverted away from your stomach and goes to your muscles to run. And so it doesn't work to do both of those things at the same time. Otherwise we get a stomach ache. So the same thing can happen though when we're stressed. When we're stressed, essentially our brain is saying we might need to run or fight or hide or do something right now. So it's sending our blood out to our muscles to get prepared for doing that and away from our digestive tract. And so it's saying, digestion, eating right now is not that important because there could be something that could kill us right now, even if it's just the work email. We're not having any lions chasing us nowadays, but always the email, right? So there's something stressful happening in our life. Our digestion shuts down. And so what people will realize when they actually tune into their body when they're stressed is we usually feel like we want to handle the stressor itself. Like that's our true innate desires. I want to fix the stressor. But we go to food a lot of times because that's how our brains were trained and the messages that we got. Maybe we also saw parents do that. Our mom was always sneaking into the cabinet after a long day, just like angry at us. And so we learned that message, like after a long day, we go to food. So these are a lot of things that are learned, but that's really good news because it means they can be unlearned. And when we can see that this was all just like a big marketing lie that was taught to me to try to get me to purchase more of these foods, because no one is giving you marketing about broccoli and eating that when you're stressed out,
No.
Maybe things would be very different if it was, but we can't get that same hit from it because it doesn't have all these additives in it the way the other foods do. So we're never going to really truly emotionally eat on broccoli or bananas or anything like that. We would have our natural stopping point come up. So that's what I would say is like, if you are going to food after alcohol, noticing what skills you already have that you've learned around alcohol, trying to apply those to food, but also starting to look at what are some of these messages and lies that I've been taught around food that maybe I'm believing, and are they actually true? Is this actually fun to binge on Hershey's bar? Is it actually pleasurable to spend my nights downing the brownies? Not really. And so once we start to see that awareness around it, that will help us.
Thank you. So much gold here. Really, really helpful information. And some of it I will take to heart myself, because I still find myself to this day eating a bit more sugar than I would like. And it's definitely the marketing. It's like, oh, but I deserve this thing. It's like, oh, this will make my day better somehow, without actually paying attention to what it really feels like in my body when I'm eating it. And especially what I notice with myself is I will have one small thing, and then immediately, even as I'm eating the first cookie, I'm thinking, oh, I need a second one. Of course, I don't need a second one, but already my brain is like, oh no, this will not be enough. And so I'm practicing at the moment, just catching that thought and practicing not responding to it, because it is just a thought. And I definitely don't need any more than a small cookie to indulge the little desire that I had for something sweet in the afternoon. I do want to allow myself that in moderation. And I love what you teach. One of the things I love about your work is how you emphasize so much that there are no good foods and bad foods. It's just learning how to trust yourself and how to trust signals from your body about what you really need, and when you stop being hungry, and when you're eating on autopilot or just eating because of an emotion. And I love that so much, because we are taught to be scared of certain foods and like, oh no, I couldn't possibly eat that. I couldn't possibly have a carb. That's not allowed. And I love that you normalize all the foods and teach something completely different. So tell me, what are some mistakes you see people making who are trying to restore their relationship with food and trying to stop binge eating and overeating? What are some of the mistakes that people tend to make?
Yeah, the first one that I always start with working with on clients is looking at how much food they are eating throughout the day. So this is like one of the simplest and easiest fixes, is making sure you're eating 3 meals a day and not just having these 3 meals a day within 5 hours at the end of the night. Really making sure you have a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, because that's what will help start to regulate your hunger and fullness hormones. It will start to create predictability around food. A lot of people's bodies have been chaos for so long that they don't know when they're going to eat again. Are we going to have breakfast tomorrow? Are we not? Are we going to have lunch? Are we going to binge tonight and then restrict tomorrow? And when we have that unpredictability, that creates more unsafety in our brain, where our brain is saying, I'm not sure what food is going to look like tomorrow, so let's like overdo it a little bit right now just to stay on the safe side. And when we start to get in that routine again, I just worked with a new client on this where she was like, she doesn't really eat breakfast. And I told her, I'm going to require you to eat breakfast every single morning, even if you binge last night. And it doesn't have to be a full, ginormous breakfast, but having something. And what's interesting is what she noticed. She's like, well, actually, I don't want to binge as much as at night now. That desire kind of goes away because I know I'm required to eat breakfast tomorrow. And I want to be hungry for breakfast tomorrow. I don't really want to have to eat breakfast after a binge. And so it already helps give her that motivation ahead of time. When we tell ourselves, well, I can just eat less tomorrow. Well, we'll be good tomorrow. I'll make up for it later. That actually propels in this cycle more and makes it so it's easier to give into these urges. So that's always like the first tip that I would give to people, is like really making sure that you're eating enough throughout the day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, making sure that you're eating to like true satisfaction, not just to like a little thing for lunch, a little salad for lunch with no carbs and just grilled chicken. Like make it a real meal.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot of people start to decrease their nighttime cravings, especially if you're getting a lot of those throughout the day or afternoon snacking. That's the first thing that I recommend. And then the other big mistake I see people making is not focusing on the mindset aspect of this. They just keep trying to go to another diet, another tip, another solution. And I know this is the same thing with alcohol too, where people are always trying to find like, what's like that one missing strategy that no one's taught me before, or that one willpower method, or that one rule of maybe I can sometimes drink on the weekends and not on the weekdays. Like they try to rule their way out of this. You don't have this missing rule or this missing tip. You need to understand why you're overeating so much in the first place or drinking so much in the first place. And that comes from looking at your thoughts. And that's always where people miss out. And you can have this understanding of, oh, I know that if I eat more processed foods, it's probably going to make things worse. I'm going to desire processed foods even more because I keep eating them. The solution then is not to just say, oh, I'm not going to eat processed foods. The solution is to decrease your desire for them. And we do that by looking at your thoughts. And I could give you ways to do this, but like the best way to do this is just with a coach, because this is what you and I have studied for years, is how to do this in an easy and effective way. And so when you're working with someone, you can really get out of it so much faster because you're addressing the root causes versus just trying to slap another random tip you found on Instagram on it.
I love that you said that because I say this all the time. It's like you need to understand why you're going for the drink. You need to understand what it's doing for you, and you need to work on removing that desire or addressing that desire, because otherwise, if we're just focused on the behavior, this is why we end up looking for the next diet, the next rule, the next strategy that's going to help me just address the behavior. But if you're not addressing the desire underneath, it's never going to be sustainable change. So I love that you just said that too and reinforced that. Is there anything else that you want to say that I have not asked you about, like any other tips or anything else that you think is important to have to say in this conversation?
One thing that you brought up earlier with the sugar and the cookies, I want to add a little tidbit too. So sugar is a big thing that many people struggle with. And I was always like the dessert queen. I would never say no to anything. I felt like I was so addicted to it because I just like was obsessed with it. It was always the thing I struggled with more than pasta or chips or any of that. It was always like the sugar for me. And the thing with sugar is sugar, especially processed white sugar, the problem with it is not the fact that it's sugar, because sugar exists in the natural world all the time in fruits and things that are very good for us. But the problem with processed white sugar is that it is an isolated form of it. So it's so ultra refined that it doesn't have a taste to it. And so what that means is when it's added to certain foods, our brain attributes the taste to that food. So think about something like apple pie. When we taste the apple pie, it just tastes like stronger flavored apples. It tastes like sweeter apples. And a good way to think about this is like the best way to describe it. If you were to make an apple stew with something, if you were to add honey onto the apples and make it all into stew, it would taste like honey flavored apples, right? You'd be able to taste that honey. It has a bit of a flavor to it. Same thing with maple syrup. And that's really important because that gives our brain the signal that, oh, I'm tasting this sweet thing that's coming from something other than the apple. It has a different flavor profile to it. But the problem is when it's just pure processed white sugar, it mixes all in that mixture. What it tastes like is a stronger flavored apple. So now our brain is attributing that sweetness to the apple, and it makes it think like, oh, again, we found the ripest apple in the earth, and this must have a lot of nutrition in it. So it has a hard time separating out where this sweetness is coming from, which can make it harder to moderate. Now, with that in mind, when we get into like something like a cookie, people sometimes will ask you like, oh, how does that work? And it's strengthening the flavorings. It's hard to explain sometimes with food, just gets so complicated with so many different ingredients. But the basics of it is that it's sweetening what's already there. Like it tastes like a sweeter egg and butter and all of those things now without actually having any nutrition or flavor attached to that sugar. And so what happens is as we're eating it, the desire will probably come up stronger than with, something like just a banana or an apple. And that's okay. That doesn't mean we can never eat these foods. But what I do recommend people doing is when you go into that experience, you want to expect the desire. I'm guessing same thing around alcohol, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you want to have a drink sometimes, if you don't want to go stone cold sober, fine. But you can't expect that your brain is going to just like, you're going to have a drink and it's going to be like, okay, yep, great, I'm done. You're going to expect that your brain's going to say, this is feeling good. We're feeling a little loose now. We should probably have another. And it's the same thing when you're eating highly processed sugared foods or ultra processed foods. You're going to expect that your brain's going to get excited and your brain's going to say, wow, this thing is so delicious. It's so yummy. We should have more of it. Not because you're broken, not because your brain is out of control or you have this crazy willpower issue that just needs to be handled. It's because your brain is perceiving that food is nutritious when it's not. That's all that's happening. And if we can recognize that, like, oh, the reason my brain is like, you need another cookie right now is because it thinks, wow, this cookie has so many good nutrients, we should have more. And that's where we say, okay, I'm just going to stay with this desire. I'm going to get through it. It will go away eventually. But that's also sometimes where we have the awareness of sometimes it is easier to just say no. Sometimes it is what we want to do to just say, I'd rather just not start with the cookie right now. Yeah. Sometimes sitting with that first urge is easier than giving into that urge and then getting a second urge to keep going, So it's something that we can decide for ourselves, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's not that you absolutely can't eat sugar again if you don't want to. It's not that you have to eat sugar in order to be like a normal eater and have food freedom. It's really just deciding, what do I want and what feels easiest to me?
Yes, thank you. So much wisdom here. I love this conversation. We could talk forever, but I think we should wrap it up for now. And who knows, maybe we'll do more of these in the future. But tell us where people can find you. If people want to know more about your work or work with you, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so the first place I recommend is going to the show notes and getting my guide guided audio to stop a binge. This is a quick 7-minute audio that I developed that I wish I had in my journey so badly, which is essentially going to walk you through these urges. It's going to help you see, how is what I'm thinking about food not true? What is the reality of what happens when I binge? And what do I really want to do instead? I use a visualization through that process. And I know that you use a lot of awesome tools as well. We were certified through the same people. And so it's a really good way to get to these deeper layers of your brain and start to help you change so much faster so that you don't eat and then you don't reinforce the habit and then you do rewire your brain around food so you don't want to keep doing this habit anymore. So I would start there. That will get you on my email list so you can hear about all of my free trainings, openings for my programs, all that's going on in my world. But you can also find me on my website, theconfidenteater.org, and that's where you can find all of my socials, my podcast, everything else.
Amazing. And I will put all of that in the show notes so people can go and get all the good stuff. I love your emails, by the way. I'm always like, oh, another email. Like, let me go read, because you always have just such awesome tips and you tell really good stories. So I love being on your email list, and I highly recommend everyone who's listening to go and join Amber's list. So thank you so much, Amber. I loved having you. I appreciate your time. And thank you, listeners, for being here. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you soon. If you're looking for practical advice for how to say no to alcohol and say yes to yourself, you will want to get on my email list. Sign up to receive my free guide with 7 steps to kickstart your sobriety. The link is in the show notes, so go and grab it now, and I'll see you soon in your inbox.